Good evening, everyone. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. It is Tuesday, January 2nd, 2024. Hope you all had a happy new year. This is our Indie Spotlight, episode 73.2, and tonight we'll be looking at the film Ben is Back from director Peter Hedges. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts this evening. And yes, all the times when we do our Indie Spotlights, for the most part, we've been looking at indies from 5 years ago. And so for this season, that's been indies from 2018. And the fun part about the last couple of years is we were on the air 9 years ago, and so we can address films that have appeared on the top 10 list that we did that year. So this time we're going to look at an indie that made not one, but two top 10 lists from 2018. And like I said, that film is Ben is Back from director Peter Hedges. Now on to my co-host for the evening. First, ladies and gentlemen, a cat mother who will do anything for her Benny, no matter where she roams. Dial O for O'Malley. Kelly O'Malley is here, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey.
And also with us, ladies and gentlemen, an estranged society member returning to us after an addiction to films from 1998. Angelo Santos is with us.
Hi, everybody.
And that reference, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that Angelo is doing our 1998 review later on. So let's go right into our schedule for this, which has been our 73rd series of episodes. It started last Thursday, December 28th. With a review of Ferrari. Tonight, of course, is the Indie Spotlight. Ben is Back. This upcoming Thursday, January 4th, is our classic movie discussion of the neorealist film Bicycle Thieves from 1948. And next Monday will be our 57th Sound Off. We're going to have an announcement. Jim and I are going to do some recastings from films from 1947. And I'm going to count down the top 5 All in the Family films, because this film in particular, a director directed his son. So we're going to look at the films in history which a family member has directed the other or has co-starred with the other. And the top 5 of those kind of films based on tonight's discussion of Ben is Back. I'm going to have to explain top 5 to everyone, but it makes sense. I saw you nodding, Angelo. It's time to figure out who's drinking with me. I've got a Imperial Voodoo Ranger IPA. Angelo, I think you've made a little mixed drink there.
This is Grey Goose and Cranberry.
Grey Goose and Cranberry. All right. And Miss Kelly, what do you got for us? Anything?
I have a Starbucks on the way, and I have a lot of water.
That does not count. Here is the drinking slide. For those of you that play the drinking game, these are things that you sent us that you drink to when we do them on the show. Anytime I say all-time contrivance, contrive, verisimilitude, or diegesis, or anytime Kelly makes fun of Devin, nothing for Angelo yet because he hasn't inspired the audience with anything particularly funny yet that he's done in the show. Still newish, Angelo, to the show, so we'll see if they pick up on any Angeloisms that they'd like to add to that list. All right, so Angelo and me will say cheers. So cheers to the audience as we get started with this.
Just cheers me twice, and it's okay.
Ben is Back. It's not. You can't cheers water. It's against the rules.
You can if you do it twice.
Oh, interesting.
We're living in the new age.
This is the trivia that we talked about when we on the last indie, our discussion of Minding the Gap. I said we're going to continue our 2018 indies, and we're going to go back to our top 10 films of 2018 to a film that not only made my top 10 list, but George's as well. And George had it at number 10, and you'll find that I had it as my number 5 film of 2018. All right, guys, we're going to move on to the summary. Unless are you guys good to move on to the summary?
All right.
Ben is back. Holly's eldest son, Ben, makes a surprise return home from rehab for Christmas. But his past transgressions has made the rest of the family suspicious and worried. And then, when Ben's former drug-dealing associates learn of his return, the family becomes threatened, sending mother and son into an odyssey deep into the underworld of suburban upstate New York. As you may recall, if you're a fan of the show, you know that we do indies a little bit differently on this show, and that one of us has to recommend the indie, and obviously tonight it's going to be me. And so normally this is where I explain why I'm recommending this particular, as I said, my top 10 of 2018. So why not let my 2018 self talk about it? So here is myself from our top 10 show on February 19th, 2019. And for my number 5, I'm going to have my first crossover with George. One of the films that we watched for our 1988 project was Mystic Pizza, in which I was blown away by how good Julia Roberts was. I've been critical of her work for years, but now this year she has a performance in which she finally has realized the potential that she had shown in that film 30 years ago. I'm talking about Ben is Back, which George had at number 10. Julia Roberts got so much right, such a complete performance. And I like the film a lot too, because it's here at number 5. I feel like it's super intimate and honest, a great tone set by director Peter Hedges, extremely well executed, and I really love Stuart Dryburgh's cinematography. It's beautiful in its own stark way. I feel like the screenplay is the real hero here. Outstanding work, great story, honest dialogue. Editing is very strong as well, particularly thinking about a parallel action sequence that leads us to a red herring. Extremely well done. Lucas Hedges, the son of the director, continues to disappoint for me in another lifeless performance, but it's not enough to detract from the movie overall. It still made my top 5. It's a movie that's going to stick with me for a long time afterwards. I know George likes it. You excited we have some symmetry?
I'm very excited, and I'm really glad that you feel this way about this movie, because I cannot believe it has been shown so little. I mean, how is she not nominated for anything? I don't get it.
James hadn't even heard of it.
Yeah, I hadn't even heard of it. Sad.
There's a promotional and distributor issue there, but it made 2 of our top 10 lists. For those of you watching out there, that's got to count for something. So that's a little bit what we had to say about Ben is Back. At least 5 years ago, and we'll dig into a little deeper now. As you saw in that clip, James hadn't even heard of the film. It's been 5 years. Had you guys heard of it or seen it before? Dealing with it for this show.
Nope.
Never even heard of it. And Angelo?
Never.
I sort of heard of it. I actually got it a little confused with Lucas Hedges' film with Nicole Kidman.
Okay.
So I was like, oh, Julia Roberts is in this. Okay.
So George was mystified about its not getting nominated. And I think we're getting a sense of why. They just did not do a good job promotionally, as I alluded to in the clip. So it's time for their opening thoughts, because they're having seen it for the first time. In one sentence or less, Kelly, your reaction to Ben is Back.
Julia Roberts and Courtney P. Vance are phenomenal.
Angelo, your reaction to Ben is Back.
I would say this is an indie from this director that I did not expect to take the turn it took.
Okay, so there were some surprises. Interestingly, it's I talked on the clip about the screenplay, and in preparing it for tonight, I actually have that talking about it last, because I like to start talking about the things that I liked about it most. And this reviewing, it's really Peter Hedges' direction that I wanted to talk about in terms of the naturalistic scene work. Like, the family dynamic to me felt real. Kelly alluded to the performances a little bit, which I'll get to. The way that dialogue overlapped, this natural sense of chaos, especially around the holidays. Even private scenes frequently breathe with verisimilitude, leading to a series of nice moments, like Holly trying to help Ben with his seatbelt, Holly trying to make sounds, while getting to urinate. Even a darker moment, like Holly suddenly beating on him in a fitting room when she uncovers a lie, and Holly's private moments waiting for Ben outside a sketchy house. And also the ability for the director to find details that add a lot to the image without feeling forced or outside of reality. The shot of Maggie's mother closing the garage door as Holly pulls out, for example. Or Ivy's cell phone camera finding a suspicious Ben as she's taking a cell phone video of him. A lot of these are small things, but they add up to a world that is recognizable and real, which makes the message of the film, to me, feel less didactic. One of the ways to accomplish this, from a cinematography point of view, is a balance of shot choices. And that's where I think the film was really successful. The camera was often unobtrusive, without being overly distant either. It almost never calls attention to itself. And I'm normally not an advocate for handheld cinematography, but here's the rare example of a film that I think does it really well, because it doesn't overdo it. Only in the scenes that call for it, the scenes where things are more emotionally chaotic. And once again, Hedges and his famous DP, Stuart Dryburgh, find some really impactful frames within the real world. The reflection of Ivy's image on Holly's cell phone when she calls next to Holly's eyes in the rearview mirror. The use of Christmas, both at home and at the mall. The shot of the despondent father suddenly rising in the window behind them. And the use of a high-angle shot in a convenience store, almost like a surveillance camera, reminding us of his criminal history and possibly foreshadowing as well. And the other thing I wanted to highlight in the direction section was the editing. I talked about a little bit of this on the clip, which I think was really strong. I mean, we talked about the balance of shots. We feel that because of the way it was edited, the way the editor balanced the wide shots and the singles and so forth and so on. Nothing lingered, and it also wasn't jumpy. It moved very naturally. But another thing that I thought was impressive, the way the film maintained and balanced perspectives. Furthermore, the parallel editing in the third act that led to that red herring I was talking about was particularly skillful. None of these things are going to register a lot because of how subtle they are, but they're still well thought out choices that add to the quality of the piece. And I know this film has Julia Roberts, but she worked for scale. And so this is a true indie. These guys hadn't even heard of it. It's a film with Julia Roberts, and they hadn't even heard of it. And so all these elements are really good examples on how best to tell a compelling narrative on a low budget. Angelo, talked a lot about different aspects of direction. Any thoughts about Peter Hedges' work here?
And what took me by surprise was what you said, how he kind of handled it with the editing and especially the performances. I liked that we kind of got to see the perspective of both the parent and the child. And I like how he handled it honestly. Those are some things you don't think about when it comes to the subject of addiction, especially in like suburban America. That was kind of a nice take on it. It was sort of like grounded and nothing seemed so over the top.
One of the things that I think you're getting to is where I started with this idea of naturalistic scene work. You kept talking about how honest it was and how real it felt. And I think that's a skill. And that's something I really took away from it. And yet, I do think it diminishes the didacticism. We're in concert there. I'm going to turn to Kelly now, who focused on the performances in her opening thought. And I wasn't sure if that suggested that there was an overall issue with the film in general. How do you feel about Peter Hedges' work here?
I really did like his work. Yeah. I think that those two performances stood out to me more than anything. But yeah, I really loved how he kind of knew when to let the scenes breathe and just let the actors communicate, and when he needed to like cut and do different kinds of shots. Like, I thought that was really lovely and well executed. And yeah, it really did feel like we were like peeking into this day. Like, it felt very, like you're saying, like naturalistic, and I think in that sense honored like what really is going on and like why that story is being told and like why he's wanting to tell that story to start with.
You made a point that I didn't in allowing the breathing moments, allowing the silences, so good and so smart. There's a patience there. A lot of filmmakers would not have the confidence to do.
Yeah, and knowing the difference of like when the story can have that and when you need to clip it along. Finding that rhythm, it's really skillful.
Soderbergh calls it rhythm and release, like knowing, it's about pace, when to move and when to breathe. You know what I mean? Like, and knowing when that is. We had that film 45 Years from a couple years ago that Andrew Hay directed that you and I reviewed. That's a film that was all breathing, like it didn't have the rhythm. And I know you liked the film a little more than I did. And I liked the film. I was the one who recommended it, right? But that was one of my issues with it. It was all release. But this one does have both. And to your point, pinpoints those moments very, very successfully. Now we're going to talk about the thing that Kelly brought up already. As you may have seen in the clip, I've never, I think I said this, I've never seen Julia Roberts better. And I was amazed. I amazed myself when I named her performance as the best of 2018 in this film. Groundbreaking work for her, a raw, deeply felt performance that communicates so many conflicting ideas. For once, I was never distracted by the persona that she carries into so many of her roles. She is Holly, a fierce, loving, determined, angry, hurt, afraid mother. It is believable, it is detailed, it is nuanced, it is powerful. That is my opinion. She has a great Oscar-baity moment when she begs the police to arrest her son. But she's even better to me when she's listening to her son, listening to her husband, not even speaking and absorbing, processing. Those are some of her best moments to me. And the aforementioned private moment in the car, she's waiting, wondering. And like I said, I easily think this is the best work of her career. Kelly has indicated that she agrees to some degree.
Yeah, I thought her performance was just absolutely fabulous. I do want to just say, just kind of off of what you're saying, that she's a movie star and she was getting hired for that persona. And it was so great to get to see her get to, because she really is a great actress. And it was so great to get to see her get to move away from that and get to dig deeper and get to explore those things that she's always been capable of doing, in my opinion.
It's hard to know without seeing, as I have not seen that from her. But it's all about opportunities for sure. Was she denied opportunities potentially because people didn't trust her ability? Very possible.
I don't know, denied. I just mean, like, it's a business, and so in terms of branding and in terms of like rom-com, like teen for so long, like that's what she got hired to do.
I completely get it. What I'm saying is, initially, and it sort of backs me up to some degree, because that same year, if you remember me saying, we were studying, Devin and I, and we're studying the films of 1988, and I saw Mystic Pizza for the first time, and I'm like, oh wow, she's really, really good in this movie, and she was good in the following movie, Steel Magnolias, that she made right after. And then I did not like any of her performances in between Steel Magnolias and this performance. To your point, like maybe she felt a responsibility to do these certain things, but what I'm trying to get at is, regardless of the reasons why, I didn't connect with her as an actor up until this particular performance. Angelo.
I love Julia Roberts from the movies you said, but I also agree she wasn't given the opportunity to showcase the talent she showed here. I think because of what Kelly said, branding. Her agents were like, no. I think she's at a point in her career and her life where she's like, I can do whatever I want, so I'm going to do this.
I would have thought she was at that point a lot earlier than this, but sure.
I want to talk about the one scene that won me, or the two scenes that won me over. And we were talking about like sort of not seeing the movie star, was the scene in the mall with the doctor, and then the scene with Maggie's mother. I liked her in that scene because I just felt like she showed the vulnerability of a mother at that point. Like she just didn't know what to do, and it's like, yeah, and you're in there with her. It's like, what did she do?
The connection between Mystic Pizza and Ben is Back is that they're both indie films. Maybe there's something about the freedom of the indie space. There's something about having an army that was somehow stifling as an actor. Maybe. Look, it's all theorizing. Either way, the results are there. Anything else on Julia, guys? Sounds like we're all in pretty much agreement. I wonder if we're in agreement here. It's notable when talking about the great performances of the movie that Kelly didn't bring up this one, who's almost like a co-lead in Peter Hedges' son, Lucas. And to me, the only bad thing that Julia Roberts did is insist that Peter Hedges cast his Oscar-nominated son, Lucas. And you heard me talk about it a little bit in the clip earlier, but I consistently find Lucas Hedges not believable, and perhaps more so here because he's required to feel like a recovering addict. And this is the only real drawback of the movie for me. I never feel that from him. I see the motions, I see the posturing, but it never feels as lived in as the rest of the performances of the film. That same year, there's this film called Beautiful Boy came out with Timothée Chalamet, also playing a young person struggling with addiction. And it's an apples to apples kind of a thing. You can look at them both and be like, okay, this is what it needs to look like. Like I said, this is the primary drawback of the film, and it's a significant one. The only thing that holds it back from being truly great. I used the word lifeless in the clip from 5 years ago, and I stand by that. Soulless is another adjective that came to mind. I see that he understands what the character is feeling. I don't see anything going on underneath. And so this is the big criticism of the movie, and performance is a second because Julia Roberts is so good. But to me, he's an issue. Angelo, Lucas Hedges. It's
hard for me to say. I mean, I don't know if it was. I don't know if I would go to say lifeless. My issue with his performance is you weren't really rooting for him. You're more rooting for the family and Julia Roberts' character. So I didn't know how to. I think the connection. You're right. Like there's the connection to his character probably would have helped the film if he was a little bit more likable. I don't know if it's likability. I mean, I can't. I don't know what that would have looked like. But I don't know if that's the issue for me. Like what I was thinking maybe something darker. I don't think it would be more likable, but more helpless. Like for example, he has a friend named Spider/Spencer in the film. I bought that character. That ad, yeah. And I did not see the history, Ben's history, in his performance the way I did in Spider or Spencer. Kelly, Lucas Hedges.
He's really natural and like good with dialogue and relaxed on camera. But yeah, he didn't have the drug addict. And I don't know if it's a technique thing, a character work thing, or research thing. Like it wasn't, maybe he intellectually kind of understood. His technique doesn't get him into the character work that really needed to happen to like actually embody that. And it made it really flat. Like, I was very aware that this actor was not a drug addict. Whatever it was, his technique didn't allow him to really get in there. I didn't see the past. I didn't see the relationship. And I don't know if like partly it's because you're being directed by your dad. Sometimes it's really hard to be directed by someone you know because they don't always see the things that aren't working.
I completely agree. And my theory was what you mentioned is I have to think all these other great performances that Peter Hedges had a blind spot with his son here. This might have been too weird of a role to be directed by your father. It's a total theory. So I thought it was interesting that you mentioned it as well. So I was not going to talk about Courtney B. Vance because he's almost always good, and just in the interest of brevity. So his performance was less of a surprise to me, but I will give Kelly the opportunity too. But I'm reading my script for him because the next thing I was going to write is the rest of my ensemble is great, pretty much head to toe, save for Hedges. But the one I wanted to call out was actually Catherine Newton, because she's so young and new in another performance that I think displays incredible promise and potential. In her own way, she too feels responsible for her brother, but there's also a jealousy of the attention that he gets. Like, she does all the right things, but he's still the favorite. But she also wants to protect her mother from being taken advantage of. So all that inner conflict is obvious and clear and palpable in a very mature, detailed performance to me. Those moments when she knows her mother is lying are particularly notable. Okay.
I've seen her before. She's good.
Angelo, anything on Catherine Newton?
No, I agree with everything you said about her. She was kind of, I'm not familiar with her work either. I don't think I've seen her in anything. So all those scenes that you mentioned, she delivered. I felt from her, she was pulling for him, but she was also very careful, and she was more there for her mom, or protecting her mom more than anything else, but she still wanted to, kind of save her brother.
And so I didn't write anything in my script, so I don't have anything eloquent to say, but I agree with you. Courtney B. Vance is a national treasure as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think I was just like happy to see him. But also I think his role was really difficult because it would be easy to turn it into like the bad guy, new dad. And he really, really found that line. The part of the film that moved me the most is when Julia Roberts has that breakdown in the car and she calls him and he's like, "Where are you? I'm going to come get you." And there's like so much warmth and kindness in that choice of how he delivers that to her. And I just saw their bond and like why they were together. I mean, they both contributed to that chemistry and that relationship, but it was so well built, and it would have been so easy to go into this cliche or this like less detailed relationship.
Thinking about the craft of filmmaking, like the actual logistics of filmmaking, that scene that you're talking about, you talk about them crafting a relationship, she's probably not there.
I know.
Because it's a phone call that you're talking about. So it's, speaking to both of the strength of their performances, that phone call, they probably read with the script supervisor. Yeah. They're having these wonderful moments on the phone. And the other thing that struck me about what you said is it made me think of the moment when he first comes in and you feel his rage, right? It's all underneath. We talk about the lack of something going on underneath for Lucas Hedges, but this character who has less screen time than Lucas Hedges, immediately you see he's angry, but he wants to control it. He wants to be understanding. This is not his son. It's a tricky situation, but he is responsible. He is paying for this person's rehabilitation. There's a lot going on. And also at one point, and this is not coming, I didn't have this coming up in the T word, he does bring up the race thing a little bit in a way that I think is really important and fascinating. Film doesn't dwell on it, but it sort of brushes by it like a person in a crowd.
Yeah, but it's there and it has to reality because it's reality.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I've got some quibbles with the screenplay, but not much. I talked about the screenplay a lot in the clip from the top 10 of 2018. It had some hiccups to me, small bumps. For the most part, I thought it was strong, very sound structurally, but also hiding the structure. You don't feel like everything flowed naturally. Believable twists, believable obstacles, very honest dialogue. Two small bumps for me. The scene where she yells at the pharmacist was a little pedagogical for me. That's a little on the nose. And then that moment where he takes him to a cemetery to scare him is a little, and I'm stressing a little here, showy. But if they were going to do that, I do wonder if Ben should have then gone back to the cemetery when he had his relapse. That's how I remembered it. And then seeing it again, I'm like, oh, he doesn't go back to the cemetery. I thought he did. But I would have appreciated that poetic circularity. That would have made that initial trip to the cemetery make more sense to me. Now that feels a little not part of the film. It feels a little expositional.
I actually love that scene in the cemetery.
Do you see what I'm saying? How it's like it's not as natural as the rest of the things. Like it feels a little like forced. Would anybody really do that? Like really?
Yeah.
Yeah, you think so?
Yeah, I think so too. Especially if she's sort of at her last point.
I can understand having the conversation, but actually driving there.
Yeah, because with addicts, you have to be extreme sometimes.
Yeah, no, I thought the script was solid. I thought it was great. I didn't really have any. I'm trying to think if there were any blips. I don't know, the maybe the dressing room scene is your my cemetery scene.
That was a little showy to you. That's interesting that we feel so differently about that, because I do like that scene.
Okay.
You know, because you know the locked doors thing. Like I certainly experienced that with addicts. You know, where you can't lock any doors, and then she freaks out when there's a door locked. Like I bought that. Different bumps, but it sounds like some minor bumps along the way, but mostly solid stuff. Kelly, screenplay.
Yeah, the drive-through scene at the pharmacy was like for me one of the biggest like offenders, but I've kind of found throughout like the screenplay wasn't my favorite. It had great, like it was great. Like I understand it's like a good screenplay, but like I was aware, and maybe just because of my own stuff, but I was really aware of that line they were writing the whole time. But in terms of like being a PSA or being a little too on the nose, the cemetery scene didn't bump me itself. The dressing room scene didn't bump me itself, but there were like little moments throughout, like lines where it was like, oh, it was just like one step, just like a hair off. I have mixed feelings about the ending. I'm still absorbing it a bit. I don't really know how I feel about the third act at all.
And it's very possible it's been recut. I remember the very ending differently.
They chickened out of something that could have been even stronger and heartbreaking. But that's the reality that a lot of people experience, and that people don't realize that it really is life and death.
I hear you in the screenplay, and it sounds like you like it slightly less, but also
right. It's still really well written. It's still better than like so many screenplays.
That fine line is baked into the subject matter. I mean, when you say better than most screenplays, it's better than a lot of screenplays probably about addiction. You know what I mean? Like it's such a tough thing to deal with. I'm impressed that they had as many moments as they did that didn't cross the line. You know what I mean? Any moment could have been into TV movie land. That's the toughest thing for any writer to do, I find, is not just about message movies even, but is the audience getting it?
It's less of like a critique and more of a thought.
So, Angelo, what time is it?
It's tea time.
It is tea time for the T word, ladies and gentlemen. This is the segment of the show where we talk about themes of the film. The original founder of the show, Drunk Davey, didn't like to talk about themes. He thought it was too much like homework. We always had to dance around it. Called the T word segment was born. And this is the kind of film that wears its themes on its sleeve to some degree. So I'm going to start with the one that's obvious. There's a lot of films made about addiction. But what's particularly impactful about this one is the cascading damage that it does. And Angelo talked about this a little bit. It's not only the damage it does to your immediate family, but to the whole community of the addict. So much of it unintentional. And that's why I think the film succeeds in spite of Lucas Hedges. It's not really from his perspective. The film is full of fringe characters that round out this theme. The family of a friend who died, who he introduced to drugs, the girl at the meeting struggling to get clean because he was her dealer, the history teacher whose own vices led to his enabling, the original doctor who first lazily prescribed painkillers that Kelly has alluded to. There's a dozen examples. And I don't know if it's new or fresh per se, but it lands really well here. The idea of the negative butterfly effect of addiction. And a sobering, if you pardon the phrase, concept for addicts to realize. It's not new to suggest that addiction is a self-destructive behavior, but so often the addicts fail to realize it's not just themselves that they are doing damage to. And then for Ben and many like him, the guilt only further feeds into the self-loathing and the cycle continues. I think of my cousin who lost her 17-year-old son to an overdose in 2012 when none of us in the extended family had any idea that there was an issue. She is still picking up the pieces 11 years later, finding it almost impossible to move on. And so, you know, the obvious theme here, they're both probably kind of obvious, but the one that the film is squarely about is addiction.
The son has that scene early on with the sister in the yard where he talks about how I've done horrible things. I can't change that. You know, I think that's true of a lot of people and especially addicts. And like, so I think that's like I'm glad that they got to like add that piece to the script of like this idea, like that it's like I've done this, but I actually have to move forward myself too, so that I can be better, because it is an illness. It becomes choice and it becomes will, and like working the program, doing whatever it is. Like there's different ways people recover from addiction. I think, yeah, the theme would be like the destruction of addiction. They do show the community. It shows how no one just becomes addicted to something on their own either. Like it's this whole system. You know, you have the proclivity towards it. Their dad left, so you have the familial element, and then you have access and means, and you have this like people offering, and you have the first thing that gets you in, which is like the doctor giving you. And so it's like how it's like it destroys the whole town, but it's also the community's responsibility too. Like when you like go out in terms of like the environments like we're creating for people.
The thing that I feel like is different about this particular examination of addiction, or at least more impactful, is this idea of the impact it has on everyone else, like the residual impact. We can have some empathy for a lot of these characters. I can definitely understand Maggie's mother, but I can understand Holly as well, and I can understand Neil. I can understand Ivy. I can understand Ben, even though he wasn't acted very well. The tapestry that it paints from that point of view, I think, is very successful. And Angelo, you alluded to that earlier, so now you can expound on it further if you like.
I actually want to expand on what Kelly was saying, and the thing that I was thinking about was more about, I like how the film sort of examined questions of responsibility, but without sort of putting in your face. I always, when I was watching the movie, it's like, yeah, who's to blame, right? And obviously you blame the addict, but then the addicts blame themselves, the parents blame themselves, the doctors don't, the industry doesn't, you know, that was kind of alluded to.
But even the doctor, you know, like let's, you know, put yourself in the doctor's shoes to some degree. Obviously, this very interesting choice to have the doctor have
dementia. Or
yeah, coup de grace to some degree to me. But either way, you know, at the time the doctor prescribed it, the doctor was probably being lazy and not having done research, or is it probably a doctor that just prescribes, you know, pain medication, you know, like easily because it moves them on to the next patient. The doctor probably didn't think that they were doing long-term harm. It's a guess.
Especially with Oxy, like they were told it's not addictive. And like they could have maybe questioned that. Like, I don't know like enough, but I know that like that was like the selling point of Oxy. It's like, hey, like it's not addictive. They can just take it. Right.
You talk about blame, and a lot of it is so innocuous. I don't want to belittle the situation. In a lot of these characters, there's an absence of malice.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know how to segue, but I'm going to segue to the next theme. I'm just going to clunkily, you know, motor right along into the other theme. I wrote it down as motherhood / family dynamics. And, you know, you can talk about, we talk about parenthood and child rearing all the time, but there's something unique and different about a mother-son dynamic that this film seems to capture. Mm-hmm. Ben is Holly's eldest son from a previous marriage, and as such, he has something of a blind spot for her, as his struggles feed into a common trait for many mothers, that need to be needed. Ivy gets less attention because she's mostly well-adjusted so far, but Ben's pain becomes Holly's burden. And Holly's struggle is a common one, the balance between love and discipline. What is the best way to save the #1 son? And it makes me wonder, how far does that responsibility of motherhood extend? And I don't have an answer here. Most mothers, including my own, will tell you it has no bounds, and Holly certainly seems to follow that trend. But realistically, and I think Kelly was alluding this to some degree on talking about blame, that Ben is an adult that has taken advantage of her maternal feelings time and time again to feed his habit. And at some point, does a mother, or any parent for that matter, need to let go? Not to stop loving or caring. Ben is in pain, but at the same time, licensed professionals are likely the best people to help him. There's only so much Holly or any mother can do. And even if she says that, I'm not so sure how deeply she would have believed it, which I think is another strength of the performance. And as much as she wants to be the tough mom, she does wind up enabling him, trusting him just by being her mother, which leads to some questionable behavior that some of us have already talked about. Consistently lying to the rest of her family, threatening the former family doctor, which Angelo talked about, now with dementia, who probably thought he was doing the right thing at the time in a likely uninformed way. Giving drugs to another addict in exchange for saving her son. How would she feel if someone gave drugs to her son? Probably the same way that she would have felt towards that doctor that she yelled at. Parents often feel responsible for the issues of their child. Holly wonders, is it her fault? You know, that her son is an addict? Was it her divorce? What could she have done differently? I don't have children, but at what point is a parent off the hook? It seems to be a lot of pain to feel responsible for not only your choices, but for those of your children as well. And so as a theme, it just feels baked in the film, and I don't have an answer. It just got me wondering about it. And Kelly went first last time, whether she liked it or not. So Angelo can go first this time.
This is something that sort of I thought about throughout the movie because of my nieces and nephews who are older now. So it's something that I hope my brother and sister don't have to go through. But you never know. And that's the whole thing. It's like you never know what's going to happen. Like, I'm not a parent either. There is a blind spot. This is the blind spot of Peter Hedges, probably. It's
wow, there's like a meta quality to this thing.
You want to believe everything your child says, but then when they're at this point, it's like, what do you do? Since we're talking about motherhood, I kind of want to touch on the scene between Maggie's mother and Julia Roberts. I kind of liked it where Maggie's mother was not mad at her. I mean, we understood why the father was mad at her, but she was not.
You got the sense that she was at one point. You know what I mean?
But not like it wasn't all blatant, like,
yeah,
you have my thought, you know? But she sort of understood where Julia Roberts' character was at that point because she was at that point.
But she had done probably some therapy, some processing that the father had not done. This is what's good about the film, though. I think I'm inferring all that, based on a lot of the work done by the performances. That's the impression that I got, that she's been processing. She's still a little raw, but she's trying to feel better. And part of that is forgiving, knowing that it's not solely Ben's fault.
I like that they brought out the non-parental characteristics of, Julia Roberts' character when it came.
Right, but I mean, the way that Maggie's mother behaved underscores how Holly behaves with Spider when she enables him knowingly gives him drugs in exchange for information. That's a very impactful scene. Kelly, your turn.
I don't want to, I think motherhood is a secondary theme that fits under addiction. I think we see that in how and what motherhood means for her character. And because she starts displaying addict behavior, lying, she becomes someone she wouldn't be to get what she wants by giving the other child drugs. And she's addicted to this relationship and to saving him.
That need to be needed that I talked about.
It would be letting him go, making him go back and pushing him away. But she wants to be with him so badly that she's also an addict. I think that theme fits under the addict.
It might be one of the top 5 things anybody's ever said on the show. It's a really good point. I completely agree. And the reason I mentioned it second is the secondary. It's certainly a tertiary, or tertiary is maybe the wrong word. Tributary theme is probably even a more accurate and precise word. The joy that he brings her is almost akin to the joy that the drugs brought him.
Exactly.
Wrapping things up. Next up, we do have this upcoming Thursday, our classic movie discussion, keeping our tradition of finishing the year with a 75-year-old film. Next up is the Italian neorealist film Bicycle Thieves, which was released in the United States in 1948. And that will be our film for discussion in just a few days. In the meantime, it's time for these guys to say goodbye to the audience.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
And for Kelly and Angelo, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jonathan Betzler, and I can officially say this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.